Hi everybody, Stanley Jones here again. I'm going to talk about 5G technology once again. I was listening to the radio the other day, and the person speaking on the radio said that 5G has more antennas than the current 3G and 4G, and therefore that inherently meant that there was more radio energy around. Uh, that is not how antennas work. You transmit at various powers. More antennas mean that you don't need to transmit at as high a power, and in theory can allow you to actually have less radio energy around. Doesn't necessarily mean you have less, doesn't necessarily mean you have more. It just means that you can theoretically have less. Um, so the argument that more antennas means more radio frequency energy is just absurd. The person saying that has absolutely no idea what they're talking about. You have to transmit from the antenna to a power high enough to reach your telephone and strong enough for your telephone to interpret, capture and interpret. And then the antenna has to be close enough for your phone to transmit at high enough a power to get to that antenna and be understood going back. So there's a sensitivity on the receiving side and a power on the transmitting side that have to match based on the distance. More antennas means that both your phone and the antenna can be transmitted at lower powers. As it is, cell phones often have multiple power levels of transmission. When they are close to a cell tower, they will transmit at a lower energy level because they don't have to get to a tower that's as far away. When you move out into an area where the towers are less frequent and you're further from a tower, your cell phone will automatically transmit at a higher power level to reach the tower. So the cell phone itself is transmitting at a higher power level depending on how far it is from the antenna. And now it's not a linear increment, it's more of a step function because it will transmit at low power, medium power, high power, for example. So the three power settings rather than have continuously varying power levels depending on distance. Nonetheless, your cell phone is actually transmitting less powerful signal if you are closer to the cellular antenna. In 5G, the antennas should in theory always be closer. So your cell phone should in theory always be transmitting at a lower power because the sensitivity of the receivers in the antennas hasn't really changed from 4G, 3G, 5G. We can make more sensitive receivers, but they tend to cost more money and are not likely to be in cell tower receivers. On the phone side, the receiver is always the same one, and 5G is basically as sensitive as 3G for the receiver side. So again, with more frequent antennas, you can transmit at lower levels. Now, there is another really foolish thing that was going around about 5G uses 60 gigahertz frequency. Well, that's not a cellular frequency in any country. It's not licensed for and cannot be used for cellular transmission. The confusion comes from the fact that the 5G standard covers a lot of stuff. And 60 gigahertz is used for cellular communication. So it is going to be used, as it is currently used, for what is sometimes referred to as the backhaul. That is the link from a cluster of cellular antennas to the main network, you might say. So you would have a cluster of cellular antennas that would be either wired or lower bandwidth radio communication between themselves that's another story. But then, so you have a cluster of cellular towers, which would then beam a signal up to a satellite. Now, the satellite signal is there for everybody to capture. I don't know if you have a cellular antenna for your TV, but it's much the same way. Whether or not your house has a cellular antenna for the TV, a satellite antenna for the TV, your house is bathed in the transmission from the TV satellite. You need the antenna to receive it. That's it. Now, to transmit up to the satellite, you need a fairly powerful signal going up to the satellite. And that signal is directed at the satellite. To make that stronger signal requires a lot of energy, and you don't really want to be transmitting that signal willy-nilly any direction. You focus it at the satellite and send it to the satellite. So, you know, the people who think that 60 gigahertz is a cellular frequency, they're wrong. It's not. It's a satellite frequency. And 5G uses satellite the same as 4G and 3G use the satellite, or can use the satellite, for backhaul. A lot of people have cellular internet at their home. And some of those, I'm not sure about all of them, but some of them have cellular downlink only. So the antenna is receiving the download information from the satellite, but if you want to upload a movie or something, that actually is going through your phone line or some other means that's lower speed. So you're using the satellite for high-speed download, and you're using some other lower speed link for the upload. That is because the satellite antennas that can transmit back up to the signal to the satellite are a bit more complex. You do need to have a relatively high power transmission, but it's directional. It's going just to the satellite. So even if your satellite internet at home uses a satellite for both the uplink and downlink, you're perfectly safe in your home, because the satellite dish is transmitting upwards, and unless you're sitting on top of the satellite dish, you're perfectly fine. It's not transmitting in any other direction. Your satellite dish should also be at the highest point possibly, or even if it's in the backyard, you don't usually have anything above it. You don't build a tree fort above your satellite dish. You wouldn't get very good reception if you put a tree fort over your satellite dish. So by and large, satellite communication is safe because it inherently is not going to the neighbors. It is between the satellite dish and the satellite. The satellite is raining down the energy on everybody, but it has been for decades and decades. There are a few more up there than there were, but there's more satellites up there raining down on us as we speak than you want to know about. And they cover everything from television to radio communication to whatever else. And for 5G, I rather suspect that in places like Canada, we would be using fiber optic more so than cellular links. The cellular links are probably more frequent in more remote areas where they don't have the infrastructure in place. Even in Canada, you might see satellite links go up someplace new, but I suspect that there is a cost advantage to switching over to fiber when that can be brought into the place. So satellite communication is really not something we should be worried about when talking about 5G. As a matter of fact, 5G really is no less safe than 3G or 4G. So if you're using a cell phone, you're using a cell phone. Hate to break it to you, but the one that you have that you're using is just as unsafe or safe or whatever you want to call it as the 5G will be. You could argue that, oh, there's risk with 5G. Yeah, those same risks just are there with the 3G. I don't think there's very much risk. I have a phone. I use it all the time. My wife says I'm always with the phone, but fact of the matter is that if you think there is a risk with a cell phone, then you shouldn't have one. 3G, 4G, 5G risk is basically the same. So there you have it. Oh, and one other thing about 5G. 5G also talks about mesh technology. Now, that again is not inherently cellular. I mentioned briefly about how you could have several 5G towers talking to each other using radio frequency. One of the approaches would be what they call mesh technology. And mesh technology is used in a lot of Wi-Fi routers for your home. If you bought a Wi-Fi router within the last couple of years, maybe last year, it probably said on there that it was mesh capable or something along those lines. And if it did, then you have a 5G Wi-Fi router in your home. Yet when we talk about 5G, we're not really talking about Wi-Fi. We're talking about cellular, and I've covered that topic. But 5G document covers a lot of territory, and part of the discussion is mesh technology. Mesh technology, when applied to the Wi-Fi router, allows you to place several routers in the house that all share the same password and user ID, and network ID, sorry. So you can log into your network once, and you can walk around the house wherever the multiple Wi-Fi routers are, and you stay connected, and you stay connected to a single router. Before mesh technology, there were two ways of handling the reception if you couldn't get one router to go all through your house. Buy a bigger router with a more powerful transmitter receiver, a more powerful transmitter, more sensitive receiver, basically, bigger antenna, if you like. And that would allow you to cover a bigger area. That worked. Or you could get two Wi-Fi routers with different IDs and different passwords, and then your phone would normally automatically log in to the one that was nearer. But you would have a transition from, front of house Wi-Fi network to back of house Wi-Fi network, or whatever you wanted to call the networks. If you gave them a name, they usually come with a default name on the back of the router. Mesh technology gets rid of that requirement, and that allows you to use multiple routers to doctor the shape of your coverage. If you have a long yard and you want to have coverage for the entire yard, but you don't want your neighbors to be able to tap into your Wi-Fi, then you put several Wi-Fi transmitters along your yard, in the middle of the yard, and mesh them so you have one password to remember. Well, you usually log in automatically anyway, but you get the idea. One network ID, one password, mesh technology, you're covered. It's more useful possibly in places like if you have an office, or if you have a shopping mall or something like that, hotels, where your customers might want to use one password, one network ID, because they don't want to program a whole bunch and then delete them all when they leave, or forget to delete them, or whatever. But so mesh technology is sort of a 5G component, if you like. It has nothing to do with cellular per se, and yet we have it in many of our homes. Many people are using it. Many people are liking it. Nobody is complaining about it. If you don't like it, don't use it. The fact that it's 5G doesn't make it any less or more dangerous than what you had before. A Wi-Fi router is a Wi-Fi router. A more powerful Wi-Fi router transmits more radio frequency energy. You are actually better off with two lower power Wi-Fi routers than one higher power Wi-Fi router if you are concerned about radio frequency energy. In the same manner, you are safer, if you're concerned about radio frequency, to have multiple cellular antennas rather than less cellular antennas at higher power. So 5G is definitely as safe as 3G. If you want to argue about 3G being unsafe, We can have that argument. But 5G is inherently as safe as 3G. So anybody who's saying different doesn't understand what they're talking about. That's it. That's all. I have never read any coherent argument as to how 5G could possibly be different in risk from 3G or 4G. It just can't. It is the same technology. There is slightly new bandwidth that are being used in 5G, but that was used for UHF TV. We were bathed in that radio frequency for ages and ages while we had our TV tuners. And whether or not you had the TV, you were still bathed in that energy. The 5G network would use the same frequencies, but at much lower power levels, because the antennas would be much closer together. So the talk about the 5G transmission, you're talking about hundreds of times less than what the TV network was transmitting at. So once again, 5G network safe, or at least as safe as 3G. If you want to be paranoid about it, eliminate cell phones. 5G is no worse than 3G. Thank you. Have a good day.